Today I'm going to tell you 3 incidents that I can recall off the top of my head of a time somebody kind of called me out for wearing a wig. Obviously I have a YouTube channel about it now. I always talk about having alopecia and wearing wigs. It's no secret anymore. But up until I was about 19, even 20, I was horrified about talking about this. Especially up until I was like 19, I wouldn't even tell people at all. Even if they asked me questions, I would just tell them, no, this is my hair, like, what are you talking about? I would just make sure that they never knew. At least I wasn't the one telling them. So obviously if people are going to be calling me out for wearing a wig back then, I would be mortified. And I know a lot of you guys are still at this place now, so basically I'm going to tell you these stories so maybe you can relate to them, and then at the end I'm also going to give you advice on how to react if people do ask you questions about your wigs if you wear wigs. So if you guys enjoy this video, be sure to hit subscribe to see more of this kind, and hit thumbs up and comment below if you want to hear even more stories. I'll try to think of more incidents like these 3 that I'm about to share with you, and then maybe make another video telling you more stories. But for now I'm just going to tell you these 3, starting with this one. So this one isn't exactly someone directly calling me out, but I knew that she was. Even if she thought she was being subtle, you get used to getting questions like this. If you wear wigs, people think they're so clever sometimes. They ask you things that aren't directly asking you if you're wearing a wig, but they kind of like try to catch you in a lie. Or the things that I always would get growing up is people would say, oh, your hair's so nice, who does your hair? And they would get like really invasive about it, even if you were just kind of like, oh, I don't know, like somewhere in the next town over, like to try to give like a vague answer. They'll be like, oh yeah, I go there sometimes, what's your hairdresser's name? Like, they'll get really in your face about it, and it's really scary. So sometimes I just, like, would make up complete lies because people would just get so in your face about it. But another question, which is the one that happened in this story, that people would always ask. I was in 7th grade at the time, and I was on a soccer team. God knows why, because I'm not athletic whatsoever, but I thought I would kind of, like, break out of my shell a little bit and join sports teams. So that year I was on the track team and on the soccer team. I was horrible. I literally avoided the ball. But anyway, that's not the point of the story. So this girl on my team came up to me that I wasn't friends with. I don't even think I was like friends with her. She was just some girl in my grade. And the worst thing about middle school for me was that in my elementary school, or in my town, there were 2 different elementary schools. So everybody in my elementary school basically knew that I wore wigs. It was just kind of like a known thing just because they all knew me since the time I wore hats. So it was just kind of like a known thing, especially because in like a tiny school, it's kind of gossipy. So when the 2 elementary schools combined, it just became like a thing of gossip yet again, because everyone from my elementary school who did know would bring it upon themselves to inform the people in the other school that I was wearing a wig. So I would get this a lot in middle school, in 7th grade in particular. I would get a lot of people coming up to me asking if I was wearing a wig. And this girl on my soccer team did just that. She came up to me and was like, I like your hair. What shampoo do you use? And I was just like, I don't know, like I named some random ass shampoo that I knew my mom had in her shower. I was just like, blah blah blah, this. And she's like, yeah? I've never heard of that shampoo before. Can I feel your hair? Like, she was just getting really in my face about it, and eventually I just made up some excuse to leave, because that was probably one of the most memorable times, because it was so rude and so invasive. And like, now looking back, like let's say a 7th grader asked me today about my hair, it wouldn't affect me. But because at the time I was the same age as the girl, it was mortifying and I was very upset. And again, at the time, that was during a time where my wigs did not look very realistic. It wasn't even the wigs themselves, it was just I was horrible at taking care of them. And because of that, they looked a lot more fake. So it was pretty obvious, I'm sure, to her and to everyone that I was wearing a wig. But at the time, I didn't realize it was that noticeable, but I'm sure it was pretty obvious. So that sucked. A story that I'll kind of throw in, not as the second story, but that one just reminded me of this one. Another time where in the same grade, in 7th grade, the same situation, I remember someone else came up to me and was like, are you wearing a wig? And I was just like, no. Who told you that? And they're like, oh no, I'm sorry, like I don't think you're wearing a wig, but like this person told me you were, I'm sorry, like they just lied to me, I guess. And again, it was probably really obvious to them that I was, but like the best thing is, like, I acted offended. Like, you think this is a wig? Like, seriously? Like, who told you that? Like, how could you think that kind of thing? But yeah, I don't recommend having that kind of attitude about it. I'll get into the advice at the end, so just hold on for that. The second story that comes to mind when I think of times people called me out for wearing a wig is when I was working at the pharmacy that I used to work at in my town. Someone basically came up to me, and I don't even think this was on purpose. I think it was just like in his subconscious he knew. It'll make sense when I tell you the story. So basically, he came up to me when he was checking out, because I was the cashier, and basically he just kept telling me that I looked like this one actress, and I had never really heard of the actress, and he told me what movie she was in, but I just kept saying, oh, okay, yeah, that's cool, like, I've never heard of her, great. But then when I got home that night, I looked it up, and I looked her up. First of all, I don't remember who the actress is, but I remember she looked nothing like me. But then I remember he said I looked like her in this specific movie. Again, I don't remember what the movie was, but I remember looking up the movie, and it was just a woman wearing a wig. And in the movie, it was like a really crappy fake wig. And again, maybe at the time he somehow like realized I was wearing a wig, or I really think that he was comparing me to this woman, not even on purpose, but I think that he thought I looked like her because we were both wearing wigs. I don't know. I think the wig I had at the time wasn't that great, so it looked more wiggy, so maybe he was just comparing like, oh, wiggy hair to wiggy hair. And I remember him saying specifically, oh no, your hair just looks like hers. Like, she was wearing a wig. Like, she was wearing a really crappy wig. Like, my wig was not that bad at the time, I can assure you. But, like, yeah, he basically told me that I looked like this person just because we were both wearing wigs. Meanwhile, our faces looked nothing alike. And then the third time where someone kind of called me out for wearing a wig, which was also super scary. I was at a Renaissance fair in New York State, the Tuxedo Renaissance Fair. It's so cool. If you live in the tri-state area, go to it. It's awesome. But anyway, I went there when I was in 11th grade with one of my friends, and they were selling like prop elf ears at this one stand, and I thought they were so cool, and the guy was like, oh, here, I'll like put them on so you can just like try them on and see how they look if you want to buy them. But as he was putting them on, I felt him like kind of moving my wig cap around a little bit, and it was making me nervous. So at first I was hoping I didn't have to tell him because I just hated telling people at the time, but finally I was like so afraid that he was gonna pull it off or something that I was just like, by the way, I'm wearing a wig, just like be careful. And he looks at me and goes, you don't think I know? I was like, excuse me? Like, what do you mean? He acted like it was so obvious, like my wig was so bad that like obviously he knew. And what I kind of realize now is that he was like one of the characters there, so I guess he's kind of like a theater guy. So, and like a costume guy also, because he was working for the ears thing. So I guess maybe it's more obvious to people who do handle and like are around costume wigs more often, but at the time, again, it was mortifying because I just thought that meant my wig was really, really obvious and crappy. But now I do realize it's just because he was around wigs more often, and he thought that he was like so special because he knew my secret. That's how people treat it sometimes. They treat it like they're investigating you and they discovered something you're hiding and they feel so proud of themselves, they don't even stop to think about how horrifying it is to you as someone who might not want to share it. It doesn't even occur to them that you might not want to tell them that you're wearing a wig, which is really frustrating to me, but at the same time, if you think about it, alopecia is not a common thing, so it's unlikely that they've ever encountered someone with it before, so you're just so fascinated with them that they have to ask you questions. They have to know all of the details, whether or not you want to share them, just because basically they don't know how to handle the situation, which is all it comes down to. So now let me give you advice on what to do if somebody asks you if you're wearing a wig and you don't want to tell them. So first, I'll tell you the approach I did when I was younger, when I wouldn't tell people, and now what I do now, if I am comfortable telling them. So here's what I did in the past. If somebody asked me if I was wearing a wig, I would say no. Sometimes they would press and ask more questions, such as, who does your hair? I would usually just pick a random hair salon in the next town over and say like, oh, that's my hair salon. And usually they would just like stop it at that. A lot of times that's what it comes down to if you don't want to tell them, is basically to change the subject, to say you have to go somewhere, or basically answer their questions as evasively as you can without telling them. But again, let me get into what I do now, because I do think it is way easier for you to just tell them. Because here's basically how people react if I tell them I'm wearing a wig now. They'll ask me, and I'll be like, yes, it's a wig. I have alopecia. And that will kind of like put them in their place. That will make them kind of like click and realize like, wow, I just asked a really personal question. I really see people's faces change instantly. Like they realize that they just asked you something that was very private, and you told them because they asked, and then they realized like, wow, maybe I shouldn't have asked that. And then it's kind of funny to see them get all awkward because like, yeah, they probably shouldn't have asked that. So I just feel like it's obviously very personal to me, but I do think it's just so rude to ask something so personal, no matter how curious you are. If you're that curious, go and Google it later and like find someone online, and then they can find me now. I talk about it all the time. They can ask me questions. I just hate the idea of somebody asking someone in the position that I used to be in if they're wearing a wig, because a lot of people still aren't comfortable talking about it. And in addition to that, if you ask them, I'm sure something that occurs to them is probably like, is it obvious? Why did they ask? Maybe they realize I'm wearing a wig because it's obvious, and that's something else. It just makes me so mad that it doesn't occur to people that like that's something that might happen if they ask them a question about it. It just makes me mad. So basically, yeah, when people ask me, I just tell them straight up. A lot of times I don't tell them unless they ask first, just because, not because I'm afraid to tell them, just because I don't feel like bothering explaining it to people sometimes unless they do ask, or unless they're like a new friend that I want them to know. But for the most part, I make it easier on myself by frequently, or like not so frequently, but every couple of months talking about it on Facebook a little here and there, or posting pictures of myself with different wigs on Facebook so it's obvious. Because for me, it's just easier that everyone just knows without me having to tell each individual person, and I'm okay with everyone just knowing. It just takes a lot of energy for me to tell people, because I feel like sometimes they react in weird ways that just kind of like irk me. Like for example, one time I told some girl in my class, like, yeah, I'm wearing a wig. Oh, why do you wear wigs? Oh, because I have alopecia. And she goes, aww. Like, bitch, no, don't pity me. I don't want your pity for the fact that I have alopecia. It's just a thing that I have to deal with. It's not a big deal. But if you go, aww, then you're implying that it's this horrible thing when it's not. It really doesn't have to be. But like, that reaction just bothers me the most, because it's like they act like it's this life-changing horrible thing, but in reality it's not a big deal. And in reality, I get to wear cute hair all the time and you don't. You have to style yours and dye yours and do whatever. I'm just kidding, no shade on this girl, she was very nice, but it just bothers me how sometimes people react in ways and it doesn't occur to them how it might affect the person they're speaking to. But yeah, so when people ask, I just tell them, and I used to get really nervous to do it. And it does take a little practice to get over that anxiety, but once you start telling up to like 5 people, then that's when you'll start breaking the nervousness and you'll start getting used to it, and you'll see that sometimes they'll react in annoying ways, like, oh, but sometimes it's kind of funny. Like with my best friend Jill, I think I've told this story before, when I told her I was wearing a wig, she like didn't understand, because I was wearing the Tatum in brunette at the time. I told her I was a wig, and I told her I wear wigs, and she goes, oh, okay, like, where are they? She didn't mean I meant, like, every day, like, right now I'm wearing a wig. She thought I meant, like, I cosplayed or something. She thought my hair looked so realistic, she didn't even question that that was a wig. She was just kind of like, what? Like, what do you mean? And the same thing happened this summer when I met one of my co-interns, who also goes to the same school as me. The same exact thing happened. I think, I was actually changing wigs at the festival. And so I was wearing the Tatum one day, and the next day I wore the Alana XO. So when I changed into that, I was like, oh yeah, this is a wig. Thinking he knew, like, they were all wigs, but what he thought was that the Tatum was my real hair, and I was putting the Alana over top of it, and that, like, only that was a wig. And I had to, like, really explain it to him. And then when I was wearing the Tatum, he was like, but, like, I can see your scalp. So, like, he thought the monofilament cap was my scalp, so I guess it works that well. Even though I was telling him this is a wig, he was like, no, it's not. Even though I just told him it was, which I think is hilarious, and it really goes to show how realistic the monofilament cap can make a wig. So basically that's all the stories I'm going to share in this video. Let me know in the comments below if you guys want to hear more stories of this sort, because telling these 3 that I just told are like bringing to mind so many more that I could tell you if you're interested. And I also hope that this advice helps you if you ever run into situations like this as well. And again, my best advice is really just to try to get comfortable telling people that you're wearing a wig or that you have alopecia, just because for me personally, I am just happier. Oh, there's a giant moth in here. Just because for me personally, I am just happier and I feel more free being able to tell people and not feeling like I have this big weight on my shoulders of this secret I have to keep. Now that I talk about it, it's almost like a fun fact to share rather than like a secret I have to hide. And it's just so much easier to live that way. So let me know in the comments below if you want to hear any more stories, or if you have any questions or need more advice or want to see another specific video on some other question you have. Again, you could also message me on Tumblr or on my Facebook page if you have further questions that pertain more to you and you don't want to ask them publicly. Those inboxes are always open as well if you're interested in asking further questions. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you in the next video.